All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. I've already passed out the homework to most of you, but if you haven't already received the homework, go ahead and make sure you pick that up. It's chapter 27 and 28, and that will be due on Monday. So whether you are in first or third or second and sixth, that'll be due on Monday. Chapter 27 and 28 are both about imperialism, so you guys, and they're both pretty short chapters. So I really wouldn't worry about it being a double chapter. It's actually quite short, so don't worry about either of them. In the new edition of the textbook, which you guys don't have, they've actually just combined chapter 27 and 28. So just for your purposes, we'll just do them both at the same time. They should still be around, so just pick that up later. Today we're going to begin Unit 7, American Imperialism, and our objective for this week will be for you to identify the different territories colonized by the United States in this era and compare the different foreign policies of Teddy Roosevelt, President Taft, and President Wilson. It's likely that today we'll only be able to get through William McKinley, who's the president we last talked about in the previous unit, and a little bit on Teddy Roosevelt, and then we'll spend the rest of this week talking about Taft and Wilson. It's a pretty short unit, but it's pretty interesting to see how America becomes a world power. So again, here's Unit 7, American Imperialism. Actually, this is Unit 7, American Imperialism and Progressivism. And today's topic, or this week's topic, is going to be U.S. foreign policy. That makes more sense. I'm going to jot that down. There you go. There you go. So Unit 7 is American Imperialism and Progressivism. We'll talk about progressivism next week. But this week's topic is going to be U.S. foreign policy. So go ahead and jot down these titles and subheaders into your notes, just so you're aware of the topic for this week. Okay, everyone have their title, heading? Great, here we go. At this point, folks, America has only been expanding within the United States, right? We talked about annexing Florida in the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. We annexed the whole Louisiana Purchase in 1803. We even annexed Texas in 1846, 1848, and the Mexican Cession after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And we even got Oregon in the Oregon Treaty of 1846. So America has done a pretty good job of expanding west across the continental United States. But at this point, are we going to start running out of room? Sure. And we recognize that as the population is constantly growing, and as we need to constantly expand even further, we've run out of room here. So the only place to go is where? Yeah. North, maybe south, maybe just other countries. Now, we likely won't be able to go into Mexico because we tried that once, and that's probably not going to work for us. We can't go north because the British still control Canada. That's not going to work for us either. So the other opportunity is to keep going further and further west. Okay, so we're going to start going and jumping across the Pacific Ocean. We're going to start jumping across the Atlantic Ocean. We're going to start finding out different territories for us to acquire, to start establishing not just the American country, but to start establishing an American empire. This time period of American imperialism is when America begins to create the American empire to rival those of England, France, the Germans, the Russians. We want an empire too, and this is what we're going to start doing. And so we're going to start looking at a U.S. foreign policy spectrum. So I do want you guys to write this down in your notes. I want you to draft this in your notes as the U.S. foreign policy spectrum. And I want us to identify how American U.S. foreign policy has changed. So go ahead and draft this in your notes. I'll give you guys some time. It looks like just about everyone has this down. This is a very simplified form of looking at U.S. foreign policy. And when we talk about U.S. foreign policy, we mean the laws and decisions that we make in regards to what? Other countries, right? Domestic policy has to do, or national policy has to do with what we do within the country. Foreign policy is the same as international policy. Is everyone clear with that? Okay. I ask that only because a few years ago, I think I told you guys this, on the day we were taking our final, a student asked me, Mr. King, what does foreign mean? And I almost lost it. I said, you guys, you had an entire year to ask me what that word meant. And you waited till the day of your final to ask. That kind of drove me crazy. But foreign policy, everyone gets it. This is, again, a very simplified form of what U.S. foreign policy is, because really there's a multitude of different kinds of foreign policy. But the easiest way to break it up is into sections of 4. The first kind is isolationism, right? Isolationism. And really you can describe that as just being a loner. You isolate yourself. You don't want to get involved with other countries. And so isolationism is really the first type of U.S. foreign policy where you absolutely do not get involved. Everyone clear with that so far? The next kind is collective security. Collective means when you kind of work together, right? And in this case, you work together to protect collective security. And in a collective security type of foreign policy, you are more of a team player. So let's say your friend starts getting harassed by, a gang member. Might you go and help your friend? Sure. Or might the police come and assist? In our community, we use some kind of collective security, or maybe labor unions used collective security. An attack on one is attack on all, right? That's collective security. In a larger scope, when looking at global foreign policy, a team player might look something like, if you attack one country, might the United States get involved to defend that country? Sure, right? That's team player. That's collective security. And that's not us going around and attacking people or going and getting involved. That's just if someone needs our help. Does that make sense? Or that's just trying to protect people. In internationalism, that's when America begins to act like a world policeman. This is when we start getting involved and be like, hey, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Let's go get involved there. Let's get involved there. Let's get involved there. So we start proactively going around and start preventing or stopping things from happening. What might be a good example of us acting like a world policeman? In what event might have America acted as a world policeman to prevent bad things from happening in other countries? Maybe Vietnam. Communism is spreading. We should get involved. Does that make sense? Whereas maybe during team player, we might say, hey, Russia, don't you invade Mexico or else. Team player is more like a shield, whereas world policeman is more like a gun. Does that make sense? Lastly, world bully. Imperialism. Imperialism is when we start going around and just taking things, not because it's good for the other country, but because it's good for us. Okay, so what might be a good example today of America, some would argue, acting like a world bully? Huh? Maybe the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. We're fighting there for what? Oil. So we destroyed their countries for oil, which is an argument that some people have made. It's not necessarily the correct answer. It might be correct and might not be. That's on your own political decision to decide. But ultimately, that's another way to view American foreign policy. So does everyone basically understand these 4? So I'm going to go ahead and give you 4 different examples, and I want you to categorize them. You can talk to your partner real quick, just to make sure we understand these, because this really does dictate all of American foreign policy, for the most part. First, Washington's farewell address. Since you have a chart, why don't you write down where you think Washington's farewell address falls in these 4 categories. So again, look at Washington's farewell address, look at your chart, and talk to your partner real quick. Where do you think this falls under? So talk to your partner real quick. Do you think this made us more of a loner? Do you think this made us more of a team player, collective security, world policeman, internationalism, or world bully, imperialism? All right. Does everyone feel like they have it? Okay. Raise your hand if you think that farewell address was imperialism. Does anyone feel like it was collective security? Raise your hand if you think it was isolationism. The correct answer is isolationism. Here's why. What did George Washington say he wanted America to do? To stay away from permanent alliances and not get involved. So is America wanting to be a loner? Is America wanting to separate itself from Europe? That's one example of isolationism or being a loner. Farewell address. I'll give you another example just to make sure we get this. Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine. So remember, 1823, President Monroe warns Europe, hey, do not intervene or colonize Latin America, Europe. Do not intervene or colonize Latin America. So in the Monroe Doctrine, America warned Europe not to intervene or colonize in Latin America. So talk to your partner real quick and see where you think Monroe Doctrine would fall in this foreign policy spectrum. Are we being a team player and protecting? Are we being a world policeman and aggressively getting involved? Are we being a world bully and only doing things for ourselves? How many of you guys feel like we were being isolationists? Anyone feel like we're being loners here? I would agree with that. We were not being loners here. We were getting somewhat involved. How many of you feel we were being world bullies? Anyone who feel like we were being a world bully? No, no one. Okay, good. How about a world policeman? I don't believe like we were being a world policeman. Okay, a few people maybe a world policeman. And how many of you feel like we're being a team player, practicing collective security? I would argue that the correct answer here is collective security because we were defending, we were saying, we were warning, right? We were being proactive and suggesting you should not be here. We're going to protect our fellow brothers in the South. So I would argue that is collective security. Now, if we got involved in Mexico because all these murders were taking place, let's say there was genocide and we're killing a lot of the indigenous people, then could we be world policemen? Sure, if we were actively getting involved in stopping murders and suicides and whatever else, then maybe we'd be world policemen. But because we're defending them from another country, that's team player. Another one, Mexican-American War. Mexican-American War. So talk to your partner. Where would that put us? Mexican-American War. Why did we do it? What was the reason for it? Think about that. Mexican-American War. Talk to your partner. See if you can figure out what you think the answer is. How many of you think we were being a loner or isolationism? Definitely not. We were actively getting involved. There was a war, so clearly we were involved somewhere. How many of you think we were practicing collective security and being a team player? We're trying to defend someone. I would also agree that was not true. How many of you believe that we were being a world policeman, practicing internationalism and trying to protect someone actively, getting involved? Okay, so a few of you. And lastly, how many of you believe that we were being a world bully, practicing imperialism? I believe the argument here would be for imperialism, world bully. Yes, we might have technically been protecting the Texans, but remember, by this time, hadn't we already annexed Texas? So it can't really be the argument for internationalism or being a world policeman. It would really be an argument for world bully, imperialism. We took Mexico, we took the Mexican cession out of force. Remember the whole, you have 3 cars, I beat you up and you steal your car? It's the same analogy. You're being a world bully. Lastly, the Spanish-American War. You don't really know about that one yet. So start with, what about World War I? Where would you put World War I on your spectrum here? World War I. Yes, we were involved in World War I for those of you that are questioning our involvement in World War I. We did fight in World War I. Would it be easier if I said World War II? Man, some of you forgot both World War I and World War II. Well, assuming that this was either World War I or World War II, were we stopping Germans from trying to take over Europe? Were we aggressively trying to prevent the world from, I guess, falling under the power of evil? The argument would be made. So if that was the case, where do you think we would fall on the spectrum? I would argue world policeman. America got involved to stop the Germans and then the Nazis in World War II from preventing the spread of Nazism. I'm sorry? It did take them a while.
So because if they're like a policeman, wouldn't they be first to react?
No, okay, so the point that's being made is whether or not, because there was a delay in reacting, they would not be a policeman. Is that the argument that's being made?
Because they didn't feel like it was their responsibility at first.
So in this case, initially in both World War I and World War II, America was an isolationist. They actually chose not to get involved. They wanted to remain neutral because of too much blood and death and whatever else. But eventually, America does get involved, and they become a world policeman. So if you want to look at it that way, America actually served as a loner initially in the war, where they said, that's Europe's problem. And then later on in the war, they got involved with internationalism because they did serve as a world policeman. Is everyone clear on that? Ultimately, during this time period, when we're going to talk about in this unit, we're mostly just going to be bullies. This is where America emerges as a world power, and the easiest way to do that is to be a bully. Everyone clear with that? So everyone good with the spectrum? Any questions about the spectrum at all? Everyone kind of have at least a good feel for this? We're going to keep on going back to this as we start looking at American foreign policy, so we'll come back to this later. So the first thing we'll talk about today is when we bought Alaska. Now this was a while back. I mean, we're talking about under Johnson's presidency. We're going to take a step back in time, and we're going to talk about buying Alaska first. Now in 1865, the United States bought Alaska. And in fact, it was purchased by the Secretary of State at the time, William Seward. So Alaska was purchased under the recommendation of William Seward, who was Secretary of State at the time under President Johnson. Now, does anyone know who we bought Alaska from? From Russia. So for a long time, folks, this was known as Russian America because we bought it from Russia. This was Russian America, and we bought Russian America from the Russians. So we bought Alaska in 1865 for $7.2 million. For $7.2 million. And Russia was selling it primarily because they felt that it wasn't profitable anymore, and they felt like they were constantly under attack by the British, who still controlled what country? Canada. So they said, what's the point of controlling this? It's too expensive. It's too far away. You know what? Who's willing to buy this? And America said, we will. Actually, more specifically, William Seward said, we should buy it for America. So William Seward convinced Congress to buy Alaska. And unfortunately, during his time, people argued that William Seward made a mistake. In fact, they thought his purchase was so ridiculous that they ridiculed him until he died. Now, he didn't die because of the ridicule, but until his death, they argued that the purchase of Alaska was a folly, a mistake, a failure. And they said, oh, Alaska, you mean Seward's folly or Seward's icebox? Because they said, why did we buy all that land? There's nothing there. So they criticized Seward for spending $7.2 million on a large block of ice. And for a very long time, they criticized Seward for purchasing Alaska, which they thought was useless. Can you easily live in Alaska, folks? No, it's hard. It's difficult. So why did we buy it? And until his death, they criticized him for it. And then we found what in Alaska? Gold, oil, a lot of oil. And we realized, maybe Seward was right about the purchase of Alaska. But unfortunately, he was dead by the time we found out that he was right. But also, to be fair, it's not like he knew there was gold and oil in Alaska. Really, why he bought it was, do we want Europeans in the Western Hemisphere? No, we don't. So we figured, let's get the Russians out, and that's one less European country in the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas. But until his death, William Seward believed that his purchase was a horrible, horrible mistake. Until we realized that was a great purchase, William Seward. Thank you for that. Too bad you're dead. So he didn't hear it. But still, here he is purchasing Russian America in the first cartoon. And in the second one, again, a ridiculous purchase of William Seward. Ridiculous purchase of America. If you look at the back here, it says, map of the Russian fairyland for $7 million in gold. So we just figured that it was ridiculous that we purchased that land. So, but that's how we got Alaska. So if anyone's curious about how one came about purchasing Alaska, we bought it from Russia because they didn't want it, and we thought it was a terrible mistake until later when we realized it was a great idea. But that's not really imperialism. And what we're going to talk about today is imperialism. In fact, new imperialism is what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about causes of new imperialism. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the exact definition of imperialism, I wrote it down for you for your reference if you need it. And imperialism is defined as when stronger nations take over weaker nations to create an empire. So go ahead and take some time to write this down. And we'll talk about empires and empire building. Okay, causes of new imperialism. And again, does everyone have the definition if they wanted it? See a few more people writing. Okay, so there are several reasons why we begin to imperialize at this time. And I'm assuming imperialize is a verb. I don't know that for a fact, so I'm just pretending that it is. But we begin to imperialize during this time period for a number of reasons. First reason, economic interest. The first reason we begin to imperialize is for economic interest. Why might America want to start taking over territories in other parts of the world? Why is that a benefit for us economically? So I hear someone in the back. They want maybe the raw materials, in this case, the gold. So definitely, one of the major reasons why we're going to expand our empire is roughly for the raw materials. Why else will we be expanding at this time? So we have raw materials, and what else? Yes? I'm sorry? So we can tax people? Sure, I imagine if we expand our empire, one really good way to make more money is to tax people. But why else? Again, we want raw materials, but why else do we want to expand our empire to other groups of people? Because those people will serve as what for us? Not just our workers, our consumers. And not necessarily slaves. They won't have the same rights as us, but the two of the major reasons why we want to expand at this time is one, raw materials, and two, to serve as consumers. Because is America industrializing at this time? Are we producing a lot of goods? And might we be producing too much for our own country to consume? Sure. And so if we want to continue creating jobs in America and continue creating all these goods, we have to find someone else to buy them. And the best way to do that is to take over another country and say, hey, buy our stuff. And while you're at it, give us your raw materials so we can make stuff for you to buy more of. And that's the basic concept of economic interest. We need the raw materials. We need the worldwide markets for people to buy our goods. And think about it, folks, isn't that true today? I mean, if you think about it, are we not expanding McDonald's all across the world? And by doing so, are we not creating more jobs in America as a result of that? Yes. Let's say that all that beef and cheese is being produced in America, but we're selling to a global community. Are we going to be creating more jobs here in America? Of course we are. And look at Coca-Cola. Look at this map of Coca-Cola. Those are all the countries currently that sell Coca-Cola products. The red. So the majority of the world has Coca-Cola products that are based in that country, which means, are they not dominating majority of the world? And if they bottle all of those Coca-Cola bottles here in America, is that more jobs in America? Yes. And so what it comes down to is that the reason why we want to expand our empire is that so we can control the world and say, buy our things. And if you're going to buy our things, are we not going to have more jobs at home? Sure. And so this is why we're doing it, folks. First reason, economic interests. Reason number 2, international Darwinism. International Darwinism. I imagine you guys remember the basic idea of Darwinism, right? Darwinism is the argument that who gets to survive? The strongest, the fittest. The strongest and the fittest survive. Survival of the fittest. Well, in this case, we're not talking about species individually, but on a global scale. International Darwinism argued that only the strongest nation would survive. And how does a nation become strong? By expanding and taking over other nations. And if you're weak, if you're a weak country, do you deserve to be independent according to international Darwinism? No, because I am a strong country. And strong can be defined as religiously strong, politically strong, or militarily strong. All of those are defined as being fit or strong. If you have the best religion in your opinion, should you take over countries that have the wrong religion? Of course. If your government is strong and that government is unstable, should you take over that country? Yes. And if your military is more powerful than their military, then do you have a right to take over their country? Of course you do, under international Darwinism. Now, we're not talking about what's right and what's wrong. We're talking about, according to Darwinism, it's survival of the fittest. Not like, well, they're crying, maybe we shouldn't take them over. No, the lion's going to eat the cub no matter what, assuming that those are in the same biome. I'm thinking bear cubs, right? I don't think bears and lions ever fight. So that could be a terrible analogy or metaphor. No, not even, I don't think lions eat deer. I don't know. I don't know animals. Anyway, so it's survival of the fittest. And this meant that in order to show that we were strong, we had to take over other countries, because expanding our empire, folks, was all part of what already ongoing philosophy in America, folks. Why are we expanding? Why do we get to expand? It's manifest destiny. Who said we get to expand? God did. So remember, folks, our international Darwinism falls along the lines of manifest destiny. God said we have the right to expand. And we already expanded from sea to shining sea. So why not just island hop throughout the rest of the countries too? If God said we have the right to expand across our country, who's to say that we're not also allowed to expand all the way across Asia and Europe and whatever else? So international Darwinism says we're the best. Might race also play a factor here? I would definitely argue so. Hey, we are a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country. And if your country is not that, you're not strong. And we have the right to show you what's best. And if you look at the political cartoon here, what are they doing in this picture? They're teaching, they're educating. And if you look in the back, See all these people in the back? Here's California and Texas and Alaska and Arizona. Look at all those well-behaved white children who know how to study and know how to learn. Whereas look at the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans, the Hawaiians and the Philippines. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, they're getting scolded. They don't know what's best. So it's our responsibility to teach them. And of course, the Chinese are not allowed because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Native Americans are sitting in the corner because they're always in trouble. And of course, blacks are still in trouble and they're still being used as slaves despite slavery already being over. So does everyone kind of understand what this political cartoon is suggesting?
Why is all the other nations black?
Huh?
Why are they all black?
They're not necessarily black, they're just darker skinned. This is our perception of other countries. The question was, why are all the other nations black? And it's not that they're black, it's just to show that they're different. I guess one term that's used at this time is that they were mongrelized. They were supposed to look almost human beast-like, because they weren't human. They were not civilized yet. You don't have to write this down, but one of the other things that we felt that we were compelled to do is that it wasn't just international Darwinism, but we had to take over these countries because it was our responsibility to. Are you guys familiar with the poem, White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling? Has anyone heard this poem before? This poem is suggesting that not only should we take over all these other countries, not only can we take over these other countries, but it is our responsibility to take over those other countries and to show them how their ways of living for the last 1,000 years has been completely and utterly wrong. And it's going to hurt us, and it's going to be hard, but it is our responsibility to tell you, hey, you're wrong. And so here's a poem by Rudyard Kipling to explain the responsibility of the whites over others. Now, this is actually referencing British colonization, but the same is true for Americans. So I'm going to read it to you real quick. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. Be open speech and simple, and 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. So the first two stanzas are describing you will suffer to help others. You will work and work tirelessly to help others. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught. So here you are trying to rid the world of war and try to attain peace and fill the mouths of those that are hungry and try to end the world of sickness. And when you come that far in all these other countries that you've taken over, those stupid people in those countries like Puerto Rico and Cuba and Africa and China, those people are going to ruin it. And all you're trying to do is to take over their country so they could be more white. Because that's the right thing to do. And they're ruining it. Your argument, why can't you be more like us white Americans? We're trying to help you, don't you understand? And yet you're ruining it. Last stanza. So take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go mark them with your living, and mark them with your dead. So you're going to go, and you're not going to be able to enter all these ports, and you will not be able to walk on the easy roads. And even then, when you go and send your living, you'll also be leaving your dead. So here you are, sacrificing for them, educating them. And do they appreciate you going to their countries and trying to educate them? No, they're always like, hey, stop trying to take over my country, and hey, stop killing my people. When what they don't understand is we're killing them to save them. Why don't they get that? But that's the argument. Why don't you understand how we're trying to help you? Yes, your family might be dead, but think of all the English you'll learn. Think of the economy that will create for you. But this is the argument of the white man's burden. And that's international Darwinism. Does everyone kind of get that argument? We're better. And because we're better, it's our responsibility to make you who totally suck better. But that's the argument. Third, global competition. Another major reason, folks, that we have to imperialize in this new 1900 era is because of global competition. And really, folks, the easiest argument is either we compete or die. It's compete or die. Who are we competing with, folks? Other European countries. We're competing with France, Great Britain, Japan, Russia, Germany. We're already competing with all these other European and some Asian empires. And if we want to survive and compete, if we want to survive, do we have to compete? Because if we don't start expanding our empire now, let's say we didn't expand for 100 years, would there be any land left? No, so we have to get in now while the land is still ripe for the taking. And here, I actually found 3 maps that I liked looking at empires, so I actually just decided to choose 3 maps. But here's the first one to explain kind of who controlled what. I mean, the British control quite a bit in the pink, right? Here you look, the British control Canada and this and parts of Africa. Obviously, you have the Japanese just controlling Japan at the time. Here you have Russia. Here you have France and other parts of Germany. So again, there are massive empires already expanding. And here's America only controlling the continental U.S. and Alaska. And look at all that land that has yet to be controlled. Couldn't that be ours? Here's another map. Are we running out of land? Are the other countries taking over and creating empires for themselves? Yeah. So if you want to be competitive, you need to get your foot in the door. You need to start expanding. You need to start expanding your empire. So that's what America needs to do, because this is a dog-eat-dog world, and it is global competition for territories. If you don't do it, will Britain take over that territory? Yes, so you need to do it now. And again, and specifically here's China. We're also trying to conquer China at this time. So we're competing for territories in China, which we'll talk more about near the end of this period. But is everyone doing okay so far? We kind of the arguments here for global competition. Then there's religious interests. Another major feature that's forcing us to expand. Folks, we have to expand because it is our Christian duty to do what? Correct. It is our Christian duty to convert and evangelize. Convert, you guys are already familiar with the term. What does it mean to evangelize? Yes, does anyone know what the term evangelical means? You guys hear this term all the time. To evangelize basically means to spread the word. To spread the word of God is basically the argument. So if you want to evangelize, is that one of our responsibilities as a country? If we are a Protestant country, are there many people across the world that have yet to hear the word of God? And is it our responsibility as a powerful country to bring that word? Because if we don't, who's going to frown on us? God. God would be like, you had the opportunity to share the word of God to those countries, and did you do it? No. To hell with you. And like literally, like to hell with you. You go to hell because you didn't do that. So, do they want to save their eternal souls? And what's one way to do that? Spread the word of God. And so one argument was through a book called Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present Crisis. And this book was written by a man named Reverend Hosea Strong. You guys should know this book. This book does come up from time to time. And Hosea Strong's book, Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present Crisis, argued that America had to engage in more missionary work. America had to engage in more missionary work. So Hosea Strong, Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present Crisis. And if you look at this picture that's kind of depicted here, this top image here suggests these were all the countries before America spread its religion to them, and these are all the countries after. If you look, the Philippines is under Spanish oppression, Hawaii is under industrial slavery, Puerto Rico and Cuba are under the Spanish yoke, they're pretty much slaves, and Panama is, disheveled and has no organization. But after we expand, my goodness, look how good they look. The Philippines is doing well, Hawaii is very civil, as are Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Panama. So again, this is what we fought for, to spread this religion, and look how civilized they've become because of the religion we brought for them. Does everyone kind of get that part? Also, I want to point back at this cartoon here. The argument is being made, what argument is being made in this cartoon?
British and the American are carrying the other nations to the promise, whatever that thing is on top of the mountain.
That the argument being made here is that the Americans and the British are carrying the savage peoples on their backs, and is it a difficult journey? Yes, they're having to go, they have to get across oppression and barbarism and ignorance and vice and superstition and brutality so that they can get where? Civilization. So again, this is a suggestion of what again? This cartoon is just like the white man's burden. Look what we're doing for you. We're trying to spread religion to you, and look what we have to endure so that your wrong religion can be thrown out the door and you can have our right religion. Everyone cool with that? Last argument, military interests. Pretty much the basic argument being made here was made by Admiral Alfred T. Mahan. He was admiral in the U.S. Navy. Alfred T. Mahan wrote a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And what do you think his argument is? Why do we need to expand our empire? Yes, but specifically, why do we need to expand? Again, the argument is expand our military, yes. Not necessarily a buffer zone either. Think about it, folks. He wants to expand sea power. So he believes we need to have a massive what? Massive navy. Now, how might we be able to have a massive navy that can spread across the entire earth? We need to have what? Territories and islands throughout the world. If we don't have territories and islands throughout the world, is it going to be easy for us to have a navy? No, because let's say you need to get from point A to point B, but you're going to run out of gas by point C. So what should you do? You should colonize an island somewhere in the middle, so you go from point A to point C, and from point C to point B. Does that make sense to everyone? The basic argument is that if you want to have a powerful navy, and history has shown the most powerful countries have had powerful navies, you need to have an empire that supports that powerful navy. Look at England. England's a powerful country, right? Do they have a lot of territories? Of course they do. Look at Spain. Do they have a lot of territories? And they had a powerful navy. So the argument is, if you want to have a powerful navy, you must have a lot of territories to refuel. And really, what he wanted was for America to have the Great White Fleet. He wanted America to develop a Great White Fleet. And what a Great White Fleet was a navy that was made entirely of what? Not white people, but that's a great guess. Not even submarines, because don't exist yet. Those don't exist yet. Not even. You guys are thinking about the white too much. They want an all-steel navy. Because up until this point, most boats were made of what? Wood, and some of them were ironclad, right? The ironclad ships. But is iron stronger or weaker than steel? Weaker than steel. And most ships were either made of iron or wood. So if America is able to produce an all-steel navy, is that going to make our navy very powerful? Oh, most definitely. And actually, folks, by 1900, America has the third largest navy in the world. Not China. England and France. China at this time is not a powerful country. China will be our plaything at this time because their empire is collapsing. They're not even communist yet. They're just empire. They're still like, the emperors are still in charge. So China is starting to collapse at this time, and we will take advantage of that. But we want an all-steel navy, and by 1900, we become the third largest navy in the world. And the only way to operate that navy is if we have what? Territories and islands and colonies throughout the world. Now, does anyone think it's kind of ironic that America fought for its independence to not be a colony only to start expanding and making colonies? Yeah, that's kind of our argument. The last reason, folks, yellow journalism. We talked about this slightly last time, but yellow journalism, folks, is basically sensationalism. We talked about this a little bit last time. But the two newspaper publishers, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, they wanted to sell newspapers because they were going to make a lot of money selling newspapers. So they began a practice called yellow journalism, which is pretty much sensationalism. And what they wanted was to expand America so we could do one of two things. Start wars. And why might it be helpful for newspapers if we fight in wars? Yeah, because they can distribute the news. Oh my God, we're fighting in Puerto Rico now? Buy the news, buy the newspaper, and you can read what's happening. Because is there a television or radio yet? No. And so the only way for people to keep up to date with the exciting news of war was to sell newspapers. So they want to start wars, hence we will fight the Spanish-American War in just a second. And the other reason why they want America to expand west, or expand in general, was because they wanted to create interest in exotic locations. Think about it. If they started writing stories about a place called Hawaii, how do you even pronounce that? Imagine a newspaper editorial about the mysterious island of Hawaii. Because you don't know how to pronounce. Oh, I would buy that newspaper, wouldn't you? Or imagine the allure of China. Oh my God, what's in China? I would buy a newspaper to read about that. Or Philippines. Oh my God, Philippines? I would want to read about Philippines. So the argument is that these people are writing these newspapers. And people are like, I want to read more. Can we take over another country so we can read more about that or fight another war? It can, to create that excitement. So yellow journalism also drove this desire for exotic locations and war because people wanted something to read. They wanted excitement. And here are these two newspaper publishers fighting over, again, war, because they want war to begin, so they're trying to establish war there. You have to write this question down, but I do want you to answer it. I'll give you guys about 4 minutes. Of the 6 that we just discussed, which of the following causes was most important to promoting American imperialism and why? This should be a very simple 1 or 2 sentence answer, but I do want a complete sentence. I want you to write the most important cause in promoting American imperialism was, and choose one of the 6, and say because, and explain why in your own words. Everyone go with that? So please, in your own words, please answer this question and choose one. Which of the following was most important in promoting American imperialism? and why. So then write down the answer in your notes. Just make an argument for yourself. I'll give you guys about 4 minutes. About 2 more minutes. If you feel like you are done with your answer, maybe you add a second sentence. Just keep going. It's more of a free write, guys. So if you feel like, okay, I have a good answer here, keep adding to it until your minute is up. Okay, you still have about a minute and a half. So just keep writing until I say stop. But try to formulate at least one argument and keep going from there. You know, say another reason or another good cause was. So if you want to come up with a second cause, feel free to do that. But please explain why. That's the important part. One minute. Like I said, if you're done, keep writing. Just choose a second cause if you want. Just get into the habit of just vomiting your answers onto your page. Just write. Okay, that's time. So I'm going to go ahead and have you guys restate those statements when I see you guys next, only because there are a few of you that I'm not actually looking at right now because I'm not here. You guys, I am. For the first and third, I'm obviously here, but if I'm talking and this is being recorded for second and sixth period, I can't ask you what your answers are and then be able to respond like, oh yeah, that's a good answer. So I'll actually wait for your answers when I see you guys next. Again, the problem being that I am here for first and third period, but when second hears this tomorrow, I can't hear their answers. Exactly. So that's why. Moving on. So in any case, folks, we're going to talk a little bit more about McKinley. This is just a placeholder, but you guys remember President McKinley from before. I just want to make sure that you guys remember that McKinley was elected at the end of Unit 6. And McKinley was appointed the 25th President of the United States. So put him down here as a placeholder just so you guys are still on track with your presidents. And McKinley will serve from 1896 to 1901 because, as we know, what happened to McKinley? He was assassinated. And we'll talk about his assassination in just a moment. McKinley is elected, and he is the president that will take us into the turn of the century, which is very exciting, folks. We are this close to 1900. I mean, literally, just hours away from the year 1900. All right. And you guys remember this picture, right? The gold picture, because during that election, gold survived the election against what? Silver. Very good. Okay. One of McKinley's next acts is to annex Hawaii. Now, you guys just call it Hawaii, but it's actually pronounced Hawaii. Hawaii. That's why it has that thing there. Actually, let's pronounce Hawaii. Anyway, so in 1898, President McKinley decides, hey, we should probably annex Hawaii. And pretty much what happened in Hawaii is that a woman at the time was in charge, Queen Liliuokalani. Queen Liliuokalani was the woman that was queen of Hawaii before the Americans took over. Okay? So Queen, we call her Queen Lil, just to make it short, but her name is Liliuokalani. She was in charge, and what happened was that by this time, there were already American missionaries and sugar plantation owners, or sugar planters, in Hawaii. So by the time America takes over in 1898, there were several American missionaries, people who were spreading what? Religion. And American sugar planters who are growing sugar in Hawaii. And up until this point, Queen Lil had allowed Americans to grow in Hawaii, allowed them to come and Christianize, and for a time being, the relationship was fair. It was mutual. But what ended up happening was that Queen Liliuokalani began to recognize that the American planters and the American missionaries were changing Hawaii. They were making the Hawaiians their virtual slaves on the plantations. And were those virtual slaves making very much money off of those sugar plantations? No. And in her mind, who should be making money off of the sugar plantations? The Hawaiians. So she decided to start taking away the land from the American missionaries and the American planters. And technically, does she have every right to do that? It's her country. Now, did the American planters like that very much? No, they did not. So what happened was those American planters had a revolution and they overthrew Queen Lil. What happened was not the U.S. government. The American sugar planters in Hawaii took over the country. They had their own mini revolution and took over the country. The sugar planters. Planters are pretty much plantation owners. The sugar planters overthrew Queen Lil. And they demanded to be what by the U.S.? They demanded to be annexed. Hey, we have control of Hawaii. Take it over. Now, previous presidents said no, but eventually McKinley agreed. And in 1900, Hawaii was annexed as part of the United States. Now, folks, is it a state? No, it doesn't actually become a state until what year? Does anyone know? Any guesses? A couple years ago. No, it's 1959, folks. It's a territory until 1959 when Hawaii becomes the 50th state to become part of the Union.
We still have 50 states, right?
We still currently have 50 states, but we have several territories. We have several territories. In any case, that happens, Queen Lil. You don't have to know too much about Hawaii, but it might come up that we took it over and it was overthrown by the sugar planters. 1900. Now, explain to me then, folks, looking at this map, why did we annex Hawaii? Why did McKinley agree finally, yes, this is a good island to annex? Yeah, it's a stepping stone. It's a military interest. I mean, folks, if you wanted to trade where, why might Hawaii be beneficial?
It's in the middle of everything.
If you want to trade with Australia, if you want to trade with China, Japan, Philippines, does Hawaii allow you to refuel right in the middle before you move all the way to Asia? Is that beneficial to the economy? Is that beneficial to the military? Guys, Hawaii is one of the most important and critical geopolitical territories that America controls today. Because is it a halfway point for our Navy? Imagine that it took 6 days to get from the US to Hawaii and another 6 days from Hawaii to Asia. By already having a Navy in Hawaii, does that make us that much more powerful? That's 6 days cut out. Which is why in 1941, who attacked our bases in Hawaii?
Japan.
The Japanese. For that reason. We already had a naval base that could attack in an instant, so of course you take that away from us. So Hawaii is a geopolitical and a military, a critical military establishment for us as well. Huh? Samoa is also very close, but we don't take that over until the following year, and that's a very small territory, and it's not a territory that has statehood. Actually, none of these territories here that we control have statehood. There are also more islands there. We blew a lot of them up when we were testing nuclear weapons in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Like islands that no longer exist because we blew them up. No, people weren't living there. They were uninhabited. But we were testing nuclear weapons, and they disappeared as we actually we ran out of islands that we owned, so we had to buy some from England so we could blow those up too. Anyway. Yes, and that actually, the radiation in the water became a serious problem, and which is why we eventually signed treaties to stop testing nuclear weapons above ground or underwater. When we get to the Cold War, I will show you an immense amount of nuclear weapon stuff because, as many of you know, nuclear weapons and the elimination of nuclear weapons is a cause that's near and dear to my heart. Spanish-American War, folks. Let's talk about the war. Again, this will not take very long because likely you won't have very many questions on the Spanish-American War, but we should discuss it. And it's a war fought by William McKinley in 1898, and only in 1898, because it was fought between, I think, June, July, August. I think it was June, July, and August is when this war was fought. It was 3 months across the world. And so let's talk about the causes of the Spanish-American War. Just write causes if you like. You don't have to write the whole thing. Just write causes. You guys doing okay so far? Great. Okay. The first cause of the Spanish-American War is something called jingoism. Jingoism. And jingoism, folks, is an intense form of nationalism. It is an intense form of nationalism. It is an intense form of nationalism. Something along the lines of, America is the best and we should take over everything and nothing can stop us because we deserve everything and God will assist us in every step of the way because we are Americans and we deserve it and we are awesome. That's American jingoism. You know, why did we go to war in Iraq? Because we could. Why did we go to war in Vietnam? Because we had to and we deserved to. No, why? We shouldn't leave the war in Afghanistan because we deserve to be there. We should blow up China because we deserve to be number one. Does that make sense? That's American jingoism. We will do anything and everything to make sure America is number one. If anything is threatening that number one position, should we do something about it? So there's a sense that if anyone threatens American statehood, America's nationalism, then we will be very aggressive. So jingoism, folks, resulted in aggressive expansion. It resulted in aggressive expansion. And it resulted in a desire for America to become what? What do we want to become? Yeah, we want not necessarily a world bully. We'll never admit to being a world bully. But what we want to become is a world power. Because don't we deserve it? We deserve it. We deserve to be a world power because who are we? America. We're proud to be America. We deserve to be a world power. And so as a result of that, we start realizing that is it okay to use military action abroad? Yes, because we're America. We can do that. Another major reason, folks, the yellow press. We talked about this before. But the yellow press was another major reason why we decided to go to this war in the Spanish-American War. And what happened here are two things. Number one, it promoted war fever with Spain. The newspapers owned by Pulitzer and Hearst promoted war with Spain, promoted that war fever. Using that jingoism. Who are they to control territories in the Western Hemisphere? Isn't this our backyard? Who are they to constantly be controlling Cuba and Puerto Rico? Shouldn't that be our Puerto Rico and Cuba? So you have those arguments. But the other argument made was not so aggressive. It was more sensationalized. Because what they did was that they discussed Spanish atrocities and crimes in Cuba. They discussed Spanish atrocities and crimes in Cuba. And here's why. Cuba was having a revolution. Why? What don't they want to be anymore? They don't want to be a colony of Spain. And is Spain just going to allow them to become free? No. And so the Spanish supposedly are murdering and killing and raping all the Cuban women and men and children, whatever. They're killing them all. And so are we going to write about that in the newspapers? Are we going to get people to feel sad about this? We're like, oh my God, those people, don't they deserve our help? Don't we deserve to kick Spain's butt and get them out of the Western Hemisphere? Yes, we do. And by doing so, are we not also going to sell newspapers? Oh, most definitely. So it's a duality. But here's an example of yellow journalism, guys. I'm going to read you just an article from one of these newspapers. And here's what it read. Here's how it read. Here's what is in one of the newspapers. And tell me how you feel at the end of this. How long are the Spaniards to drench Cuba with the blood and tears of her people? How long is the peasantry of Spain to be drafted away to Cuba to die miserably in a hopeless war that Spanish nobles and Spanish officers may get medals and honors? How long should all Cuban men and women and children be murdered by the score, the innocent victims of Spanish rage against the patriot armies they cannot conquer? How long shall the sound of rifles in Castle Morro at sunrise proclaim that bound and helpless prisoners of war have been murdered in cold blood? How long shall Cuban women be the victim of Spanish outrages and lie sobbing and bruised in loathsome prisons? How long shall women passengers on vessels flying the American flag be unlawfully seized, stripped, and searched by brutal, jeering Spanish officers in violation of the laws of nations and of the honor of the U.S.? How long shall American citizens arbitrarily be arrested while on peaceful and legitimate errands be immured in foul Spanish prisons without trial? How long shall the U.S. sit idle and indifferent within the sound and hearing of rapine and murder? How long? Don't you feel like, oh my God, why are we doing nothing? Don't you feel enraged and entranced and sensationalized? The emotions within you stirring? Why are we not getting involved? Is this type of yellow journalism effective? Will this stir the public to demand their congressmen and senators to vote for war? This is effective. And so that's one really good reason why we started the war. I love that, by the way. That's just a great use of just poetry It's very strong. And obviously it's designed to initiate a sense of emotional response. Another reason why we go to war, the Delome letter. This is pretty fun, the Delome letter. What happened was that the Delome letter was a letter from the Spanish ambassador to the Spanish king. It was a letter from the Spanish ambassador to the Spanish king. It was a secret letter. And what happened was that the Spanish ambassador wrote a letter to the Spanish king criticizing President McKinley. Said, the president is an idiot, and how he's running this country is terrible, and he does not know what he's doing, and he's going to drive his country into war, and it is a mistake, and he's a horrible, horrible person. He's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. So he writes a letter from America as a Spanish ambassador to the Spanish king criticizing President McKinley. The letter was intercepted by Americans. So what happens is one of the newspapers actually receives the letter. They intercept the letter through spies and whatnot, and they publish the letter by the Spanish ambassador criticizing the president. And, It's in Spanish, but they translate it. Now, what might the response be of the American people when some Spaniard criticizes your president? Were the Americans angry? Yeah, folks, the Americans saw it as an insult to American honor. They saw this letter as an insult to our American honor. Now, do we insult our presidents all the time? Most definitely. In the previous administration, people called President Bush an idiot, and in this administration, we call President Obama, a communist. But we're allowed to do that because we're Americans. We can criticize our own presidents. But if you're standing, let's say, at the airport, I'm like, man, Barack Obama's such a communist, or President Bush is such an idiot, and some British guy's like, oh yeah, I agree. I'm like, hey, that is my president. Don't you dare call President Bush an idiot. How dare you? Barack Obama is not a communist. Who do you think you are? And your friend says, oh, Barack Obama is a communist. Oh, I know he is a communist. Hey, but you are not allowed to say that. That is my president. And so the irony here is we're allowed to criticize our own presidents because we're Americans and we voted. And that's how the American system works. But if anyone comes around and says, your president is terrible, you say, hey, you watch your mouth. That is my president you're talking about. And so the insult to American honor really did say, to war with Spain! Who do they think they are? Insulting our president! So that happened. And then this happened. The sinking of the USS Maine. So what happened was that the USS Maine was a Navy ship, or a U.S. ship, that was docked in Havana Harbor. The USS Maine was a U.S. ship docked in Havana Harbor in Cuba. Pretty much, they sailed a ship to Havana Harbor to evacuate any Americans that were still in Cuba during the revolution. Is that pretty common? Does that happen whenever there's a revolution in a country? Do we go in to try to rescue our own people? Sure. So that's what happened. We sent the USS Maine to Cuba to drive out to help the Americans leave and just to make sure no terrible things were happening. So we sent the USS Maine in. Then what happened? Let's see if there's another picture here. In February 15th, 1898, you don't have to worry about the date, but February 15th, 1898, for those that care about the date, February 15th, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor in Cuba. It just blew up. Boom! Exploded. And 260 Americans were killed. Naturally, who did we blame? The Spanish did it. Those dastardly, evil Spanish, they blew up our ship to try to teach us a lesson because we were trying to get involved in their war with Cuba. How dare they? All those innocent Americans, children, sons, fathers, dead at the hands of the Spanish. Now, naturally, the Spanish said, it wasn't us. We didn't do it. It was not us. But they said a Spanish mine blew up that ship. And this cartoon came out. And look at that cartoon for just a second, and you tell me how it makes you feel. There's Spain, that brute, hands covered in blood, knife bloodied, with dead American soldiers in the back with signs like U.S. soldier mutilated by Spain, and Maine soldiers murdered by Spain. And what's that? He's standing on the American flag. Those bastards. Now, interestingly enough, folks, Spain didn't do it. In fact, we didn't know what did it. We actually had no idea. But is this our opportunity? Like, oh, a ship blew up? That's terrible, but opportunity. We can blame Spain. Now we have a reason to do what? Go to war. Eventually, folks, we actually recovered the remains of the USS Maine. And we did an investigation, and what happened was the ship blew up on its own. The engine with all that coal and all that powder keg and all that ammunition blew up accidentally. And the ship just blew up on its own. It was no one's fault. It was by accident. But are we going to tell that story? No, this is our chance, guys. War, finally. So we have our argument. And so, McKinley has no choice. And with a heavy heart and a smile on his face, McKinley is forced to ask Congress, under public pressure, to declare war. Now, to be fair, McKinley himself did not want to go to war because does any president really want to go to war? No, you don't want to be the president responsible for the deaths of millions of Americans, but does the public want to go to war? Do the American people want to go to war? Is the newspapers kind of fueling this war? So McKinley is forced to declare war, and he says that we have to go to war to protect the lives of Americans. But also we have to go to war to protect who? The Cubans. We have to protect the lives of Americans, but we must also protect our brothers, the Cubans. So we're also protecting the Cubans. Now, is he arguing that, and then we can annex it? Is he making that argument? Because if we say we're going to go to war to annex Cuba, is that going to make us look like a good guy? No. So we want to look good. We want to look like everyone's our friend. Like, oh, those terrible Spanish, we're going to have to get rid of you. But in the back of our heads, we're like, oh, and then we're going to take it over. Then we're going to take over Cuba. But can we admit that? No. So in your notes, real quick, folks, please answer this question. Which of the following causes was most important to causing the Spanish-American War? So jingoism, yellow press, the Delhomme letter, or sinking of the USS Maine. So which do you think was most effective in, or most important in causing the war with Spain? I will give you about 4 minutes. And again, when you're done with your answer, just continue writing. Maybe choose a second answer, but write for the full 4 minutes, please. about 2 minutes. So again, if you feel like you've sufficiently answered one, choose another cause and explain why that was also important to causing the war. Again, try to draft out your ideas. May not be plugged in. Facing all the way. About 30 seconds left. Okay, and I will revisit those questions again later when I see you guys next. There was opposition to the war, folks. There were people that said that this war is bad because might there be some people in our country that believe that imperialism is morally wrong? There are several people that actually dislike imperialism. I think we shouldn't be going around and just taking over other countries. We shouldn't be going around and just telling people what to do. America should focus on America. And so what emerges is a group called the Anti-Imperialist League, who are morally opposed to creating a world empire. They're morally opposed to imperialism. I mean, would they have agreed with the annexation of Hawaii? No, but they felt that was bad because we took it by force, right? Those sugar planters took Hawaii by force. So there were many people that, again, opposed what was happening in America. And here's one example of them. This one example is of Lady Liberty standing in the middle here. And she's trying to stop Uncle Sam from taking over, here in this example, the Philippines. But again, you have the Anti-Imperialist League trying to prevent the Americans, saying this is not what's right. Colombia is the spirit of America. Uncle Sam is who? The American people. So the spirit of America is saying this is not what you stand for. You should not be involved here. So the Anti-Imperialist League does oppose any form of annexation. And they especially believe that the only reason we're fighting the Spanish-American War is to what? Annex Cuba. They feel like you're only fighting this war to annex Cuba and we won't support it. And they believe that this is what's ultimately going to happen. You know what? Sure, we're going to go ahead and make a lot of money, but look at, at what cost? All those dead as a result. This is what we stand for now in America. And so their argument is that what we're doing is wrong. What we're doing is not just. We can't simply go out and just annex territories without, doing what's right. We feel like annexation is terrible. This is going to become a problem for us. So in order to make sure that we get the anti-imperialist to vote for the war, Congress decides to insert the Teller Amendment to the war declaration. Okay? So what happens is that to make these anti-imperialists happy, they introduce the Teller Amendment. This is an amendment to the war declaration. You have to note that part so much. But they introduce the Teller Amendment. And what the Teller Amendment to the war resolution said was, America will not what? Yes, we promise not to annex Cuba. So in the Teller Amendment, we say, we will fight this war, and we promise not to annex Cuba. So is that going to make some people upset? I'm like, I really wanted Cuba. But maybe there are other opportunities here. Spain does control a lot of territories. Maybe we can take those. So again, we promise not to annex Cuba in the Teller Amendment. And we promise to promote self-determination. What is self-determination? It's another term for what? What's another term for self-determination? Kind of like popular sovereignty. It's the same as self-government. We promise to promote self-government or self-determination. Who will decide for Cuba? Themselves, the Cubans. Okay? Self-determination, America will not decide for you. We'll let the Cubans decide for themselves what kind of government they want. It's popular sovereignty, it's self-government, it's self-determination. But is that kind of a big deal, the Teller Amendment? We're not going to annex Cuba, but we'll still fight this war. Everyone cool there so far? So the Spanish War begins, and you don't really have to know most of it. So the Spanish-American War begins, and we're just going to go through it pretty quickly. We'll probably be able to cover it in about 5 minutes. Because one, it's the shortest war of them all. The war only lasted 3 months. It was a very, very short war. You'll see a lot of slides. That's not commensurate to the amount of notes you actually have to take. But here's the Spanish-American War and actually what happened in 1898. Pretty much the war began May 1st when we surprise attacked, and again, you don't have to write any of this down. This is just what happened, just so you're aware. If you want to write it down, by all means do so. For the purpose of your test, you don't have to know this. But this is called our splendid little war because it's so short. But the war began in May, where we surprise attacked Manila Bay and destroyed Spain's entire Pacific fleet in 7 hours. So pretty much what happened was that Spain's fleet was in Corregidor Bay. It was in the Manila Bay. We sent our all-steel navy in, and we blew them up. And they couldn't leave the bay because we were blocking the only exit. So we blew them up while they were sitting there, and the Filipinos helped. So we did that. And we destroyed their entire navy in 7 hours. So that sucks for Spain. Then on July 1st, a month later, we start fighting in Puerto Rico. And President Roosevelt, who becomes the eventual president, leads the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill. We take that over. And then on July 3rd, the U.S. Navy sinks the remaining Spanish ships. So pretty quickly, we're taking them over. Here they are. Again, they secretly sail from Hong Kong here to Manila Bay, and we blow up all of their ships. And then we sail up to Cuba, and we blow up all of their ships. And then we sail to Havana Harbor, and we blow up all of their ships, and that's the end of the war. Yes? The Spanish actually controlled the Philippines. Remember Magellan came in the 1600s? 1691 to all the way. So the Spanish have controlled the Philippines for like 400 years. So once the Americans show up in 1898, they no longer. Now here's the fun part. The Filipinos are helping the Americans because Americans said, hey, help us fight for your liberation. So what did the Filipinos say to that? What? We get to be independent? Great, we will help you. So the Filipinos naturally said, yes, let's get rid of the Spanish Empire and become independent. Huh? Who? The Spanish always, they win a few battles, but all the key battles are the ones that are important. They can't win. Also, America's navy is new. Spain's navy is old. Very old. Age, it's old in terms of not having steel sides, but wooden or iron sides. So that's not very effective. I mean, I can slam my navy into yours and tear your boat like knife into butter. I mean, if you just put battering rams on all of the American ships, we can just drive through the Spanish ships. They're just not as powerful. And we have larger cannons. We have more ammunition. Remember, as America's empire is growing, Spain's empire is vastly and quickly collapsing. Shorter picture. We capture Manila, like I said. Here we are in Spain. Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. So what happened was that one of the events that did happen, in addition to all these things, is that Theodore Roosevelt, he's one of the guys involved. He was the assistant secretary of the Navy. He was the assistant secretary of the Navy. And when war was declared, he's like, I want to fight, because this is a guy that, I mean, we'll talk about President Roosevelt in a second, and this man is like hardcore. He's probably one of our toughest presidents ever. He had a pet bear, so there's one of those things. But in any case, he wanted to fight in this war, and like, no, Secretary Roosevelt, you can't go and just fight in a war. You're the Assistant Secretary to the Navy. He's like, fine, I quit. And he quit his job as Assistant Secretary to the Navy so he could fight in the Spanish-American War because he wanted to fight in the war. So he quit his desk job to see some action. Then he creates his own mini militia of troops, goes into Puerto Rico, and sends his army and charges them up San Juan Hill in one of the famous chargers of a group called, not to be confused with DMX and the Rough Riders from the 1990s. Which some of you might remember, or not, because that was when I was a kid. But anyway, Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders made that famous charge up San Juan Hill. San Juan Hill. And people thought, President Roosevelt, not president, Teddy Roosevelt, you're crazy. He's like, yeah, crazy like a fox, and then he charged up San Juan Hill on horses. Now, the interesting thing is that the hill was so steep. Remember, should you ever attack uphill? No, because you don't have the advantage. People shooting down have the advantage. We learned that in the Battle of New Orleans with Andrew Jackson, right? You should never charge uphill, but he did on horses. But the horses couldn't climb up the hill, so they had to get off the horses and run the rest of the way up. But it wasn't even his group, the Rough Riders, that took the hill. They were assisted by a black regiment, black soldiers, actually assisted them to help them take San Juan Hill. But again, a pretty interesting story about Teddy Roosevelt, who we lovingly call TR. Anyway, the Spanish-American War eventually ends with another Treaty of Paris, and this you should write down. So the war ends with the Treaty of Paris. The war ends with the Treaty of Paris. The war ends with the Treaty of Paris. War ends with the Treaty of Paris. And again, I'll write this down. These are the terms of the treaty. Number one, Spain must recognize Cuban independence. Does it say anywhere that America is going to buy Cuba here? No, it does not. Also, Spain will give up the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, and they will give them to the U.S. for $20 million. So they're going to sell those territories to the U.S. And these nations are not going to become states. They're going to become protectorates. And according to the U.S., why are we taking over these territories? Why did we buy these? In order to what? To protect them. Why are we really buying them? Take advantage, imperialize, expand our empire, take advantage of resources, use their consumers, for all the imperial reasons. But we call them protectorates. These are people that need our protection. Of those three territories, who is not okay with this treaty? The Philippines. They're like, wait a minute. I thought that we were fighting to be liberated. If I had known that I was going to free myself of the shackles of Spain only to put on the handcuffs of the Americans, I would have fought both of you. So naturally, the Philippines is pretty upset here. They are none too happy with the going-ons here. Everyone go with this? We're almost done with this. You guys still writing? Looks like it. Are these territories still protectorates today? Guam and Puerto Rico are. The Philippines eventually became independent. Now, you guys might think, oh my God, I mean, they won that war, they got all that territory, but at least they didn't get Cuba, right? Because Cuba was the thing that we said we wouldn't get. But then we did get it, and let me explain how. This is the last thing you guys will cover today. We promised that we would not annex Cuba, right? We promised that in what amendment? The Teller Amendment. And so, here's what we did. We helped Cuba write their constitution. Okay, so let's talk about the Platt Amendment here real quick. Here's what happened. Let me put it this way. We forced Cuba to include the Platt Amendment in their constitution. We forced Cuba to include the Platt Amendment into their constitution. Now, you might ask, well, Mr. King, how did we force them to do that? Well, did we have American troops in Cuba at this time? Because did we just fight off the Spanish? Sure. So we said, hey, Cuba, if you want these American troops to leave, you're going to have to accept the Platt Amendment into your constitution. And naturally, the Cubans said, fine, we'll accept it. But here's what the Platt Amendment said. The Platt Amendment said, the United States could intervene in Cuba whenever necessary. The United States could intervene in Cuba whenever necessary. Which means, if we feel that Cuba is doing something bad, can we just send in the military? And it's in their constitution, it says we can. The second thing that it said, Cuba may not sign a foreign treaty. Cuba may not sign a foreign treaty without U.S. permission. Cuba may not sign a foreign treaty without U.S. permission. So they can't sign treaties with other countries unless America says it's okay. No, eventually Cuba does not have this anymore because they have the Cuban Revolution again. Not anymore today. But yeah, is Cuba independent here? It looks like America can take over Cuba whenever it wants. But they're not because Cuba is independent. It's not part of the U.S., but do we pretty much have control over Cuba? Yes, we do. So do we still get Cuba? Yes, even if it's not official. That's where we're going to leave it today, folks. How did you guys do with your first lecture of the semester? Pretty good? Okay, good. All right, then. You guys all have chapter 27 and 28? All right, make sure you guys have that. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, folks. I will see you guys next time.